So we're recording now.
This is Bob. I think Leanne Rawls and maybe Lita have tried calling in. Leanne indicates she's on hold. I don't know what that means.
I'm here, John Phillip.
I believe Yolita greeted us earlier.
Okay.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm here.
I'm sorry. But I think Leanne, I texted her and she said she was on hold.
I just let somebody in. Okay.
At the tone, please record your message. When you've finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Okay, well, here's what we're going to do. I think we have everyone that we need for the first two agenda items, and we are on record. So I'm going to call the meeting to order, and hopefully the team can work on getting Leanne on the call. And just a reminder to please keep your phones on mute if you're not talking so we can reduce the interference. And so we're going to get started. So good morning to everyone. We're going to call to order the Hartford Subcommittee of the MARB for Thursday, July 23rd at 10 a.m. I do not have any opening remarks. It looks like we have a pretty hefty list of agenda items. Glad to hear everyone today and glad that everyone is doing well and we're healthy. So first up, the approval of the minutes for June 25th, 2020. Is there a motion?
Mark, so moved.
Second, Bob White.
Shaw. And Christine
Great.
Shaw is finally present.
Excellent, thank you. All right, second by Christine Shaw. For the record, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion for the minutes of June 25th, 2020? Great, hearing none. Julian, please go ahead and do a roll call.
Mr. Felsigno,
Yes.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg,
Yes.
Ms. Shaw,
Yes.
and Secretary McCaw.
Abstain.
That are there any committee members that I missed that joined the call? Okay, that's everybody.
Okay, great. All right, so first item on our agenda will be continued review and discussion of the 5-year plan, the efficiencies and the mitigation measures. I'm going to turn it over to the mayor and the team. I will ask if for you, and we do have your documents that you submitted, if you'll just very quickly highlight some of the revenue assumptions that were originally in the 5-year plan that was submitted to the subcommittee and to the MARB, and then walk us through your thoughts on potential efficiencies and other mitigation in the event that these deficits materialize. So over to you, Mayor, and good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks, Secretary McCaw and everybody. And I will turn this over to Bob and Yolita very quickly. But if you recall, the original revenue assumption was that we would have 1.5% grand list growth each year.
You have reached the maximum time permitted for recording your message. If you're satisfied with the message, press 1. To listen to your message, press 2. To erase and re-record, press 3.
I don't know if everybody else heard that as well.
If you're satisfied with the message, press 1. To listen to your message, press 2. To erase and re-record, press 3.
Did anyone try to dial another person in?
If you're satisfied with the message, press 1. To listen to your message, press 2. To erase and re-record, press 3.
Julian, any recommendations?
Sorry, you're having trouble. Your message has been sent. Please try again later. Goodbye.
Okay, that's what we wanted to hear.
All right.
Here we go.
Let's restart the recording.
We're off to a fine start.
Julian, please restart the recording.
You can stop it and restart it.
Well, is it still working? It doesn't look like it is. Recording?
It is. It's still recording.
Okay. All right. I apologize.
Okay.
Okay, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. So the original plan assumed 1.5% annual grand list growth, as well as 3.5% increase during the reval. The plan submitted reduces that annual assumption down to about 0.69, I believe. You and Bob jump in if I get that if I'm wrong, and that's partly what causes the gap. I'll turn this over to Bob and Yulitza to walk through the specific assumptions, specific recommendations that we've put forward beyond that.
Great. And Bob and Yulitza, when you just give me for each year of your forecast the grand list growth that's assumed, and when you go through that, if you can just speak to if that grand list growth is not achieved, how much larger are these shortfalls? So we get a sense of the full magnitude given what we recently saw in your latest grand list changes. So over to you, and thank you, Mayor.
Yolita, you want to start with the grand list stuff or the revenues?
Well, we have a John Phillip on this call, so I think he can talk regarding the grand list.
Hi, yes, John Phillip here. I really, going out, I don't know what to think.
Yeah. Can we just jump? I'm sorry to interrupt. Yulitza, can you just walk through not the explanations of why we think they're sound? We can get to that, but can you just walk through what's included in each year of the plan we've submitted?
Sure, I can do that definitely. So for FY 2021, the grant list assumptions were 0.69% growth from FY 2020. In FY 2022, the annual growth assumptions were the same, 0.69%. And going forward from 2023, the growth list followed by 1.5% growth in the following years. So,
Yolanda, can you say that again? You broke up for me. 23 to 25 was what for the grand list growth assumption?
So in 2023, we have reval, so the assumption was 3.5%. And in 2024 to 2025, it was 1.5%.
Perfect. Got it. Thank you very much. Okay.
So just in other words, to summarize, we continue to extend the reduced assumption for the next couple of years, and then stick with the old reval assumption and growth assumptions beyond that. All that said, as we've talked about before, we may well seek to delay the reval, and we'll have to work together to do that. We would need state approval to do that, and we'll have to, I think, see what the pace of this recovery is to determine whether or not that's something we want to do. But there's no question that is an additional potential vulnerability in the current plan.
Okay, noted. Thank you, Mayor. Great. So Bob and Yulitza, are you going to walk us through the 5-year plan efficiencies? We all have a reminder of the modified assumptions. Glad to see that we took some conservatism for 21 and 22. Understand the potential of the delayed reval. So let's talk through the ideas that the team has put forth in the event that there's some mitigation that needs to occur here.
Yeah. All right. Okay, not on mute. So as in the 5-year plan, each year there was a gap of basically about 4.8 million in each of those years that we were asked to close. As the mayor noted at the last subcommittee meeting, one thing this doesn't assume is any, because there's some collective bargaining agreements that are open during this time period with groups that have taken a number of zeros for a number of years, and so but in the plan, not wishing to put a particular number in that regard, so these gaps do not reflect any additional impact that could happen with those bargaining units. So that's just a caveat to the $4.8 million gap that this plan would seek to close. So it, as you recall last time, that so in the chart we had, of that 4.8, we would close, and potentially about half of that with undesired reductions in our pay-go capital X. That could either be in a couple ways, either alternative funding sources for those projects or an actual reduction, which would be, considering the city's capital needs and its, inability to go to the market, would be a sacrifice. But it's a doable reduction, just not a desirable one. So that would be a half of that, and then would be some another million or so, as you could see in the plan, would be related to just reducing operating expenses. And one of the areas, one of the areas we would look at in terms of, and try to further improvements more in the some of the procurement and efficiency issues on health insurance. We're going out to bid for a new third-party administrator. So we would look through, various reductions to achieve that $1 million reductions. And then there was a series of other items totaled, about 1 to 1.5 million, that were a series of particular efforts that we've been having ongoing discussions with the committee on. Those were tax collection efforts in the about 300,000 typically. Private duty, I guess there's been a number of changes there in terms of strengthening the collection there, some policy and other changes. That would be 250 to 350,000. Workers' comp reduction strategies, some relatively modest reductions, but return to work programs, maybe I think some closer management and monitoring with departments in terms of cases and improved management efforts around those. So various reduction strategies with respect to workers' comp. Strengthening the golf operations, the rounds of play have gone up significantly. There are also some other cost changes that we would look at there. Looking at the, working with our Director of Public Works, the budget for 2021, it shows some positive direction, and this would be trying to reduce or eliminate the general fund contribution that would make it, obviously a challenge, but so we're only showing a portion of that in the next year, and then in the out years, hopefully some continued improvement in the golf operations. And then another area that the city's had, already had success on, and we're pursuing more in terms of LED and other improvements in energy efficiency. We have those in for 350 to 375. Again, the city's already had some success in some of those areas. So those efforts total between $1 million and $1.075 million. So those would be closing those would largely close the $4.8 million gap. And we also put forward, just some placeholder numbers here on local revenue diversification, whether it be in the pilot area, local excise taxes. There's an idea of a franchise fee for which we need state authorization for ongoing fees for permission to use the city's right of way for various utility uses. And so on these revenue diversification issues, we had some discussion with the committee last month, and we were asked to come back with additional information, which I think has been distributed to the committee. So that is an overview of the plan to mitigate the gap. Hello?
Sorry, coming off mute. All right,
Okay.
thank you, Bob.
You get this bad feeling that you're talking to yourself for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I know that
my phone
feeling.
dropped off.
There you go. So thank you for that overview and putting together a more substantial list of the tools, if you will, that the city could utilize to close these gaps. Obviously, you've also prepared some information for us with respect to attrition could be a little bit higher. We know that we historically run higher than what we budget, which is fine. We're conservative about that. A couple of just questions for me before I open it up to the committee. With respect to the increased revenue collections for private duty, maybe you or Yulitza could speak to what you're referencing here on the $250,000 to $350,000 gain. Are we thinking of adjusting rates, or, I mean, CRDA I know is a big piece of your uncollectibles, if you will, but a little bit of more detail underneath that particular mitigation item would be helpful. And then secondly, on the workers' compensation reduction strategy, I know that the former risk manager had done significant work in this area. Do you believe that there are collective bargaining changes that would need to be made to achieve some of these savings, or is it really just, you know, being more mindful and doing the follow-up with the data with the department heads so that they are kind of monitoring the trends, et cetera, training, which are things that Hartford's been very good about doing in the past. So a little bit more clarity on those two items, please.
Yulitza, you want to go with police extra duty, and then I do workers' comp?
Sure. So on the police private duty, the information that we provided is based on few actuals that we had in the past 2 years. So, for example, even this year, FY 2020, our budget is $2.75 million, and we coming over $3 million in actuals. So we already see some favorability here, you know, by $300,000 in the past year and this year. So what we've done in a few years, we enforce collections by contacting vendors and as well by emailing statements and following up on all outstanding balances. So we can see that actual that it's really potential seems to be we collecting more than we collecting in the past. Besides, we offering online payments as well, and we are working on a third-party collection agency that I think would help us even improve more than we are right now.
Okay. Well, Yulitza, that's great. I know you started that work, and I see now that you're seeing the fruits of the labor, so that's outstanding. Great. Bob, on the workers' comp piece?
Yeah, I don't really, in doing this, it didn't contemplate collective bargaining changes, or we didn't, you know, whether those would be possible. But I think these are, I think it's more around, you know, management, expanded light duty. I've been working actually with Sarah, the Renew Risk Manager, about, and I think also with our HR director and Corporation Counsel's office, on reporting and able to be on the track cases in a closer basis, feeling, and I think the city has always, as you've noted, has managed these, but it's, you know, as you know, what gets watched even closer gets managed even closer, and I think that's some of the, I think our thoughts that we could achieve additional savings just by being, you know, continuing to be on top of cases and managing those cases. And making sure that we're, you know, that you know, we're always accounting for the, you know, those expenses appropriately and keeping on top of those. Expanding light duties as appropriate would be one of those tools, and you know, and then along with the other training and safety activities, you know, some of those were, you know, I think some of those are probably, you know, during this COVID period probably have been, you know, they've been the training activities probably have, there's been fewer safety meetings and that type of thing. but I know that
Sure.
Sarah's been working on various training activities as well. So largely, it can continuous improvement in terms of management, and no specific collective bargaining changes. Are contemplated at least this, the 75 to 200, or the changes
Got
we're
it.
showing here.
Okay. I would urge the city to take a look at.
That said, Melissa, we are.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I would urge
we are.
Yeah, I would
Sorry.
urge the city to take a look at some of the recommendations that have been sitting there for several years that would help move the needle a little bit more, because our salary continuation practices don't incentivize return. And obviously, we know the research shows that if the salary continuation policy runs counter to encouraging folks to return, then you have less, fruit, if you will, in that. So I just would urge you, as you're getting back to the bargaining table, and I expect this round of negotiations will be very different than the last. This might be a meaningful area where you could see some savings, given you'll need to do wage increases and all that good stuff.
I agree with that. And Bob, if you and team could get me, I've seen that before, but if you could get me that list of recommendations, you and Sarah, that would be helpful. We do have some things, we are in off-the-record discussions with Fire, which is the first union whose contract comes up, and there are some things that we're talking about that would have that might have an effect on workers' comp.
Great. All right. Other discussion.
Well, this is Mark. I think it's obvious that the unknown is the impact on the COVID-19 on the budget for this year, which would affect long term. So it's kind of flying a little bit in the unknown, to say the least. But when I say I'm satisfied, up to this point, I think all the good work that has been done in realizing that there is unknowns out there, and when the unknowns become more known, other issues may need to come forward regarding, revenue enhancements rather than reductions, because the reductions, I think, could be very detrimental to the city as a whole. So I think we just have to be mindful that it's a day-to-day operation right now based on what's happening at the federal and state level.
This is Bob White. Not to jump ahead on the agenda, but is the assumption here that you are not counting on any savings not in the budget from the Board of Ed? And again, we can talk about that then. A subsidiary question is the accurate assumption that there will be no additional COVID-19 expenses on the board side that aren't covered by some type of federal or state aid, when, if it should be forthcoming?
Mayor, can I jump into this one first?
Sure. Yep.
Okay. So Bob, throughout the state of Connecticut, districts have already received about $100 million in CARES Act funding to support additional costs. And in the next few days, districts are finalizing their reopening plans. They have put forth a request for funding to the governor, to OPM, to support the cost of reopening, and the governor will be announcing what kind of support we'll be able to provide for a safe reopening of schools. So I want you to know that there is some funding that has already been distributed, and certainly additional resources that are to come. And I'll have the mayor talk about any other measures or financial plans that they might have to help supplement that.
Thank you, Secretary. I was aware that money has been distributed, but as we get closer and closer to opening, the more I read, throughout the country, that there are pretty substantial additional expenditures like buses more monitors, more buses. Are all the teachers going to come? Do you need more teachers, especially when you split classrooms and stuff like that? But we can talk about that, I guess, with when the superintendent is on. But it would be wonderful to know that the cost of those things will be borne by some type of government aid. But we'll see.
So just a couple of things to add. We do not assume that there is additional assistance coming, nor do we assume any costs that are not reimbursed. I think that many of the costs that we actually incur will be reimbursed or reimbursable. I also think that it's likely there will be some assistance coming. But beyond that, I don't know whether we're going to talk about this later, but we are still projecting a surplus from FY20, and that surplus that we reported to you in advance of this meeting is larger than we were previously reporting. It has grown as we've had actuals come in, and so from that, I think we intend to set aside at least some amount that we'll think of as a COVID contingency, probably in an assigned fund balance for COVID contingency that would then roll on to the fund balance, unassigned fund balance in the event that it's not needed.
Great. And Mayor, do you have an update on your projected fiscal 20 surplus?
Yeah, our current projected fiscal 20 surplus is $17.6 million.
Okay. Very good.
That's
fabulous. I believe the last number that we reported was approximately 10.4. And that increase, we can walk through the delta there if it's helpful. A portion of it is the healthcare savings, but there were also, there's also favorability in areas like cash outs and some contingency and a few other things.
Great. And the 17.4, Mayor, assumes that you've made all your planned transfers for CapEx?
Well, it does not. What we have. Actually, let me just clarify a couple of things. One, that surplus will be reduced for an accounting reason that I think I now understand, but I don't understand well enough to explain it to anybody else. By the surplus, the Board of Ed surplus that we took last year and are now will now be assigning back over to the Board of Ed or spending down. I think that reduces our FY20 surplus, but increases our unassigned fund balance.
Got it.
So the number will actually be around 15 from FY20, at least on current projections. What we're assuming we would do with that is set aside the $5 million that we talked about in full committee for our civilian response team initiative, spending that $5 million over a 4-year period to build up the civilian response team capability. Set aside some amount, probably about $5 million for additional capital reserve expenditure, and then roughly $5 million for additional COVID contingency that would roll into fund balance if it's not needed. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And what do you think your restated June 30th, and if Leanne's on, maybe she could answer this one, your restated closing fund balance unrestricted will be with the correction for June 30th, 2019, I guess?
It would be about 12.
It'd be about 12 and then the 15. Okay, got it. All right. Okay.
So it would be right. The unassigned fund balance with that adjustment would be around 12 million, and then to the extent that we don't need the assigned COVID contingency, that would rise to 17. At some point during fiscal 21, hopefully.
Sure. Okay. And assuming you never needed any of it, then you really would have 12 plus 15 million. You could potentially be at 20.
Not an unassigned fund balance, because again, we are setting aside the 5 million for the civilian response team initiative.
So you'll be at 10.
And then an additional 5 that we would put into the capital reserve.
Got it. So you're doing 5 for the civilian response. You're doing 5 on COVID contingency and 5 on cap.
Correct. That
Okay.
at least is, I mean, we have not done any of this yet, but that's notionally been my direction to the team. And I think that's consistent with the approach we've taken, in concert with the MARB, saying that, we two overriding goals being to continue to build up fund balance and continue to pre-fund capital, and knowing that capital is a vulnerability in the plan and is also potentially one of the areas that we have to dip into to close the gap. We want to make sure that we're continuing to fund capital. And in light of the coronavirus challenge, rather than putting that remaining $5 just directly into unassigned fund balance and then having to draw down with the bad optics of drawing down from an unassigned fund balance, we'd rather call it a COVID contingency now and put it into unassigned if we can.
Mm-hmm. My only feedback on that is if you're going to start using more of restricted or assigned fund balance, that you should still demonstrate that unassigned is continuing to grow year over year.
Absolutely.
And
yep.
And that's the only weakness I'd say about the plan, is that, you're not going to demonstrate that in the event you fully use the COVID contingency, the cap, and the civilian,
It will still grow, though. Unassigned fund balance will grow from about 9 to about 12.
That's because of the correction with the Board of Ed?
I don't know if correction is the right way to describe it, but that's correct. The adjustment.
Okay, maybe Leanne can send over an exhibit. But I do think that's an important practice for you, to continue to have unassigned grow year over year. And hopefully that's what you have.
Agreed.
Okay. Other discussion?
Leanne, do you want to add, did I get anything wrong there, Leanne?
You did an excellent job, Mayor. And Melissa, I will send over an exhibit once we lock down all these numbers, hopefully in the next week or two.
Great, thank you. Any other discussion?
This is Mark. I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about the exhibits that Julian sent and Bob sent dealing with the tax-exempt property. You want to talk about that now or later?
This is the appropriate agenda item where it looks like the diversification options, et cetera. So happy to have that discussed now.
Yeah, I requested the information based on the possibility of bringing to MARB some policy and or legislative recommendations from MARB to the legislature regarding whatever you want to call it, additional revenue, or whatever the title of the legislation may or may not be. And let me give you the basis of the examination that I was asking for, and that is very simply to determine, using Hartford and some other large municipalities that was sent, the information that was sent to us, to try to determine what portion of the total tax-exempt property is not funded by pilot, what percentage, if you will, based on a variety of, present Connecticut general statutes. And if you do a quick calculation, you look at Hartford is, I guess, approximately, it's about 26%. Waterbury is a little bit in the 30s. New Haven is low at about 11, and Bridgeport is over 20. And the theory, very simply, is without giving the Secretary a heart attack, deals within available appropriations that exist to allow MARB to, and again, I'm giving you the framework rather than specificity, to allow MARB to authorize a revenue enhancement dealing with pilot if a community reaches eligibility, and the eligibility would be based on the city or town being a Tier 3 or Tier 4, and also having, my thinking right now is a minimum of 25% of tax-exempt property not being eligible for pilot funding in accordance with Connecticut general statutes. That's the eligibility factor, and then you get into what does that mean, and that's a MARB authorization with the secretary having the authority to distribute additional dollars, again within available appropriations, based on that authorization. That's a framework, and the reason I use that as a framework is because it has a bit of oversight to it, and that is that the MARB, there must be an eligibility requirement for a municipality to get into this, call it a revenue enhancement category, if you will, for now. But then an authorization from MARB based on the goodwill that it sees being offered by the community, rather than just a carte blanche saying, okay, you're eligible, therefore you get. I don't think that that's good policy. I think in a situation where a city or town has shown good faith, and the secretary, along with MARB, has certified, if you will, that they've done everything that they can to systemically come within the frameworks of good budgeting and good accountability and good transparency, that MARB feels that any further reductions would be injurious to the community and the citizenry at large. So it's more or less a relief valve for a municipality after MARB has determined that every avenue has been explored, but there is, and the systemic changes that they've asked have been implemented, and there still is the need for additional revenue to carry them through a period of time. This wouldn't be a permanent authorization. It would be an annual authorization based on certain factors. In Hartford's case, there's a variety of moving parts here that could go either way, and if they turn down, you have to look for some enhancements to at least maintain a level of service for the citizens and for the capital city. So I just wanted to bring to the subcommittee's attention, as well as the city and to the secretary, I'm more inclined as a member of MARB to work towards a MARB authorized relief, and I call it a relief valve, but revenue enhancement based on existing tax exempt property for any municipality if it reaches a certain threshold, so that we're not just talking about Hartford. That's why I asked for the 4 major cities, and it could apply to anybody based on how pilot is reimbursed. It's talking about a total amount of tax exempt property and what percentage of tax exempt property is not subject to pilot. And then you get into the intricacies that I'm working on as to what would be the percentages that MARB would be eligible to authorize, up to what level, and then of course the secretary would distribute the funds in accordance with MARB's direction. But that was the thinking, and I understand the cities and Bob's document regarding additional thoughts that they have regarding some of the options, such as they're talking about certain fees, et cetera. I just, from a political perspective, I think it's a non-starter because it would require legislation. And from a policy perspective, I think it's too focused on one city, where I believe that if there's going to be a policy, it has to be for any city or municipality that enters into the MARB arena, how it could gain access to additional funds within available appropriations based on MARB's oversight and certification that such city meets eligibility and has done all the due diligence that they can do in order to meet its obligations. So I just wanted to share with you the rationale for why I was asking Julian to do all that work and Bob doing all of his good work, to let you know where I'm personally coming from and what I'm working on.
Thanks, Mark. Any other thoughts on the framework for Mark's request for information from the city?
This is Bob White. Thank you very much for the information, and I think I would suggest that this sort of be an ongoing item as you think through it. A very quick 30,000 overview from my point of view is is any provision that attempts to sort of assumes additional state money to fund pilot in some sort of way, I think is going to be problematic certainly in the near term. And secondly, the notion of a governmental entity that's looking at the public interest and is distressed, looking to nonprofits that are doing the public interest and are distressed is kind of difficult. I started looking at the Lincoln Land Institute. They've got some studies, and there's a whole bunch of other folks that I suspect Bob and the Hartford team are aware of. But, it seems to me that, as we've discussed before, that the notion that the Hartford, just the way the boundaries are drawn, has a lot of people of need, and quite frankly, a lot of services that are used by the suburbs. And, regionalism is, we understand the politics. Maybe this is a time to revisit it. But I really think some type of mechanism that passes through whatever the additional funds are to the suburbs who use these facilities, many of which are staffed by Hartford residents at low wages. But anyway, I think it's a thorny problem. I think we ought to keep it on the agenda. But I appreciate the data.
This is Christine Shaw. I just want to echo those comments and just comment more broadly that we've had some really interesting policy discussions within the context of the Hartford Subcommittee over the past year. And I'm fairly new to the work of the MARB, but not new to some of these broader issues around what kind of systemic changes need to happen that may require, a broader approach on the part of the state and maybe some legislative remedies. I do find this information helpful. I'd like to, and I do think we should continue to have these discussions because as an oversight board, we have the kind of short-term or discrete time frame within which we are assisting these municipalities who need our oversight and assistance. But I always look at our objective as a longer-term one where we begin to bring to the fore some of the underlying structural issues that have led to MARB oversight in the first instance. So I feel like it's part of the work that we do. And having these broader policy discussions and fashioning a plan, I think, is part of the responsibility that we bear.
Great. So let me jump in there and say that I think that Mark and the team raises an area of our work that the MARB thus far really hasn't weighed in on, right? That we have an opportunity to make recommendations for legislative consideration, given that by and large, the folks on this call spend a lot of their time delving into the finances of distressed municipalities. Obviously, the state faces a $2.5 billion problem next year, but I think we have to always remain cognizant of the fact that even the most efficiently run municipalities their expenses are going to increase 3 to 4% per year. And if we are a significant or some portion of their revenue base, then they have to disproportionately, if you will, increase the remainder of their revenue base in order to keep up with even the most efficiently run organization. And so, I will always impress upon the governor and leadership that some amount of adjustment on a more continuous basis is warranted for municipal aid in light of that reality. Now, that being said, I will say that the politics of giving OPM and the MARB a pot of funding to distribute as they see fit to account for pilot adjustments is a very difficult conversation to be had. And many of you have witnessed those conversations that occur on the floor. That's probably a more challenging approach, but I think that this is the beginning of a conversation on perhaps recommendations we could make to think about tweaking the formula or carving out a portion of funds that specifically address distressed municipalities. And the timing for that is now, as we're going into kind of legislative development for the regular session. We typically entertain those proposals starting in October. So I think this is the beginning of us moving into another space to put forth those types of recommendations. I will always ground you with my MARB hat and my OPM secretary hat. But I welcome your ideas, and we should continue to have this as an ongoing agenda item, if you will, for the broader group, and perhaps be either utilize the conversations in our committees to give recommendations to OPM as we're formulating ideas for the governor, but also formal recommendations that could come from this body for consideration by the legislature. And I encourage our members to be a voice in that building and testifying on bills in support of recognizing that muni aid has to be more consistent. Those increases have to be more consistent, and even when the state is facing some challenges. So I appreciate everyone's thoughts on that, and we'll continue the work. So with that, before we move out this agenda, and I want to be cognizant of time, we asked the city to put forth a little bit more meat and potatoes, if you will, on how they would potentially close the gaps in the event they materialize. I think they've put forth some credible, thoughts on measures that they would utilize. I do question golf operations, having been in, under the hood there, and know that that's a struggle to bring that to balance. And we know that some of the local revenue diversification are items that would require legislative action, not to say that we shouldn't continue to think them through and vet them and push them forward if warranted. But the city has identified $7.4 to $9.9 million in mitigation. It's thoughtful, I think it's grounded, and many of these I do believe are achievable. So with that, thoughts from the committee about a favorable vote of the 5-year plan out to the broader committee. I don't see any additional follow-up that's necessary for us to put a credible plan in full board.
If you're looking for a motion to accept the 5-year plan, I would make such a motion.
Great. Is there a second?
Bob White seconds.
Great. All right. So we have a motion to approve the 5-year plan for the city of Hartford. It's been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? All right. Seeing none, Julian for a roll call.
Mr. Felsigno?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Shaw?
Yes.
And Secretary McCaw?
Yes.
That's everybody.
Okay, excellent. Great work, guys. Next on the agenda is an update on the corrective action plan regarding the fiscal 2019 audit, and I'm going to turn it over to Kim and then to the city.
Thank you, Secretary. You will see in the packet that you'll notice that the city has provided us with an overview and a status update. I'm going to ask, I believe, Leanne, are you able to walk us through this document in the status update?
Good morning, Kim. Actually, Bob created this document, so I can let him walk you through and I can fill in as needed. Is that okay, Bob?
All right. That sounds great, Leanne. I don't.
Thank you, Bob.
I know Sharice. Yeah. Sharice is going to try to make it, but she's very busy with schools and trying to all of that work and trying to continue to get City Hall more and more reopened. So I will. But I did consult significantly with her on that. So I'm just getting to that. I'm scrolling down here to get to that. So a couple of things, as you know, the city first looking at there was the Bloom Shapiro 2018 report, a review of IT controls, in which they had outlined 11 items. In addition, the city has brought in a group, Janus Software, to review a lot of security issues on top of, including and on top of those that Bloom looked at. So I think phase 1 of that seems to be coming to a close, and phase 2 will include some implementation issues. So I can just, walk through the 11 findings, of which I think 3, as you'll see, had remained open, and we can talk about the status of those. But, other findings like user ID and password controls, items 1 and 2, those were previously closed by Bloom Shapiro, and I think the city, looking at the current systems and other improvements made, those item findings seem to be resolved. The third, which we talked about last month, was the laptop computers need to be secured, and the city has 164 laptops, excluding those who are managed by police and fire, which have their own security requirements imposed upon them. We've to date, 25 of the laptops have been were encrypted. For those remain working remotely, they some of that will have to wait until we're back, and some of that's starting to happen, but some of that will happen. I think some of those security issues that may be associated with that probably are addressed by the changing of passwords consistently, items 1 and 2, but some of this work is in process and will to be fully completed. We'll need folks to return to work, to return from working remotely. They're continuing to work. Some of the areas about some of the servers and Windows unit, being items 4, 5, and 6 were about systems that were at the end of their support. And when things are at the end of support, they don't get security patches, they don't get the support. The city has moved off of all of those on and is now on to systems that are supported. So that's 4, 5, and 6. The software procurement process that was closed by Bloom Shapiro, but we continue to make further improvements in that. And so I think MHIS is continuing to work with the procurement division and Leanne's department, and it looks a draft of those will be completed by further improvements in the procurement process for software by the end of October. Looking at, when you're on the cloud, you want to make sure that those who are managing the cloud, your outside vendors, are doing security on their end. So it was recommended that we obtain and review their reports for cloud applications, and that has been done. So Bloom has closed that one. 2 items, the policies and procedures, not yet complete. Based on the phase 1 work of Janice, we're now moving into phase 2 for completion of the new policies and procedures. And according to Charisse, those should be done by the end of this calendar year. And the disaster recovery, it was indicated a documented disaster recovery plan was not complete. That again was part of the Janice phase 1, and now we're into phase 2. And that is the plan is to have a citywide disaster relief and plan by December 1st. And we can obviously keep you updated as to our progress. So now that we've laid out some dates, you can continue to work with us on looking at how we're doing. And ongoing cybersecurity training. That has been was purchased in June. I have to check with Charisse as to actually, if that's been rolled out to city employees, but I can check on that. But that is the status of the 11 findings of Bloom's 2018 report, including the 3 that had remained open. And
Thank
I'll
you,
try to
Bob.
answer any questions you might have.
Yep. This is very helpful, and good to see that it's laid out in a template, and then we can use this going forward. So I appreciate your good work on pulling this together. Item number 3, as far as the laptops, I think I mentioned this at the meeting the last time. One of my questions or concerns as the city as a whole, as I would look at a corporation as a whole, it's mentioned that fire and police are excluded from the number. Did Bloom actually not audit that area and or included in your fiscal annual audit, is fire and police included, or are they audited separately?
Well, they would be included in the, obviously the city, as in the city's audit. With, I guess if the question is when Bloom did their security review, were they just looking at those systems managed by MHIS? Not having been here, it sounds like that may have been the case, and so, but we could review with police and fire, whether what protocols are on their laptops in terms of encryption.
That's exactly my case and my point, Bob. Thank you.
But I'm saying that I don't know that for sure, what Bloom Shapiro did. But it does indicate here that the police and fire are following CJIS requirements, which I'm anticipating. We'll find out that they are obviously very sensitive to having secure systems. So, but we can find out more. I suspect that they're, and Sharice may know this already as well, but I suspect that they are ensuring the security of their systems. I could just find out in what form that takes.
Are they using a third party for that IT? Or is it internal?
Leslie, I don't know if others on the phone who work for the city would know that, but I'd have to find that out.
Okay, so all I would want to, my case and my point is, one, if they're using a different IT unit or security firm to be able to help them with their IT, that one, if so, then you get a white paper from them solidifying that they are adhering to those rules, not that it's just a verbal conversation. And if there's risk there, we would want to mitigate the risk for all departments that are amongst the city, not excluding, I would probably say, the police and fire. If something became unsecure with their laptops, that could be detrimental to the city. So that's all my case and my thoughts about it, is making sure that when we look at it, we don't look at just the areas that, again, are brought to our attention. We look at all of them.
Yeah,
Thank you, Bob.
There are a number of systems that the police and fire use that are citywide systems, applications, like I said, Munis and other systems. So this, in terms of, it looks like for desktop support, specifically here would be, they have IT staff that provide that type of support for their desktops and I assume their laptops. But there are a number of applications they have that that police and fire have that are citywide applications that MHIS does about. So the security audit would have covered those. This may specifically be on the issue of desktops and laptops, but I can find out and get the information that you're looking for.
Yeah, and Bob, as you know, police have laptops in their cars. So, if that isn't secure and somebody should take it from their car, we would want to make sure that that is secure as well. I'm
sure they are, and Bloom Shapiro could have indeed looked at that. I don't know, but I'm sure I get back. I'm sure I'm sure they're secure. The police and fire have taken,
Kim, I believe
I'd be very confident.
So Kim, I believe that's what that other certification that Sharice mentioned for police and fire, because their systems outside of desktops and laptops used for administrative purposes are tied into state systems and FBI systems for, criminal reporting. So I believe that's what that certification that Sharice mentioned earlier is in regards to. So as Bob said, I believe their administrative laptops, desktops, all of that was covered in the Bloom Shapiro report. And then the certification covers the units that are tied into systems outside of the city. Okay. But Bob and I can get confirmation on that for you.
Thank you. That's the only follow-up that I have, and look forward for updates as you start to move forward on updating those policies and procedures. Thank you, Bob, for doing this.
All right. Thank you. You're welcome.
Great. Any other discussion? Any other discussion?
The Board of Ed is the next one. Secretary.
Very good.
Good afternoon.
All
Good
right.
morning. Clarence Sacker from the Board of Ed.
Good morning.
So the update we have is this information. So for those who don't know, I joined the district back in January. This audit finding is actually a carryover from our 2017-18 year. We had an employee who's now retired, but is an elderly gentleman who was out sick for an extended period of time during the late fall during the audit. So our team was delayed apparently getting information to the auditors, so they added this comment to the management letter because of the delay in getting information to them. It involves, cross-training of our team. So what I gave to Julian was a letter that we got an inquiry from the state about what steps we had taken. We had started some of those steps, corrective actions, but with COVID, some of them have been slowed down. The employee in question from a few years ago has now retired officially. We've replaced him. He's now helping us out part-time, training his replacement, so with that he was a fountain of knowledge both at the city and the Board of Ed. He was a longtime employee of the city and the Board of Ed, so he was a walking database information. We're trying to cull that information from it and document it for future references. But in the letter I sent to the email I sent to the state, we have a plan in place. Our implementation of our plan has been delayed by COVID. We're still moving forward. Part of the problem is staffing. We've posted some positions this month, given we're in our new fiscal year. So we are trying to get that done and get those positions filled. Part of the problem apparently 2 years ago was we had some positions that were cut. So when we lost those staff members, the ability to respond to the auditor's request was delayed.
Could you then, if you were to take a step back, can you, Clarence, for the next meeting, provide a timetable of what your plan is to be able to close this? So, June 30th, 2020 is already over with. This will be another year of a repeat finding, and I understand that you're new and only been there 6 months. So if I look at a 6-month-old, you're just crawling, and I've been in that position. So I would ask if you would please at least, when do you plan on closing this, and what is your plan timetable? If you could have that for the next meeting, would be very helpful.
Yes, ma'am. We should do that. Like I said, I actually found about this audit finding in May, so I wasn't even aware of it. So I had to do some due diligence to figure out what happened and do some background. Once we got that, we start formalizing our plan. So I will have a time schedule for you for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Great. Any other discussion on the Board of Education piece of this agenda item? Okay, moving on to status of the Board of Education RFP for special ed.
I'm texting the students.
Hello,
right
everyone.
Now.
I've been on the call. This is Superintendent Torres Rodriguez.
Hi, Superintendent. How are you?
I am well, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that I did submit a slide deck PowerPoint that I can talk through, or I can just kind of stand by and wait for questions, whatever you think is best.
Superintendent, why don't you go ahead and walk us through your deck? We all have it in front of us, and then we'll jump in with some questions.
Great. So I will start, and if you just jump ahead to page 2, I have 2 relevant pieces of context that I wanted to share for this presentation. First, as you know, we at Hartford Public Schools we've been engaging with you all at the MARB to get an understanding of our financial risks, particularly related to special education and how to handle those risks. And also, over the past 10 to 12 weeks, we have partnered with Civic Solutions Group, a consultant, to work with us to identify ways to improve our special education practices, and then also develop a set of recommendations, and then create a corresponding implementation plan, all which we we meaning myself and the MARB, you all have had conversation about in the past. If you follow me to the next page, titled Project Design, two factors have guided our work with CSG. First, we had to reflect on our district model of excellence, which is our strategic plan, and also we kept the MARB's past recommendations top of mind. And to this end, the project with CSG included 3 stages, as you see articulated there. Analysis and understanding our current state with regard to our practices, organizational structures and responsibilities. Also using that analysis to target high impact areas in special education, including out-of-district placements, paraprofessional services, and then the tiered supports. We've talked about before a continuum of supports in special education. And lastly, focusing on, again, the recommendations that are aligned to those 3 high leverage areas. So with working with a consultant, we did identify those 3 high impact service delivery areas, which will be which will be the focus of the remaining slides of this presentation. So just wanted to frame the remaining of this slide deck. If you follow me to the next page, project activities through June, this is a table. I won't go deep into the weeds, but I just wanted to lay out, it's sort of like the agenda for the rest of the presentation, which shows how for us to reach the high impact initiative areas, they're colored across the top. We focused on content related to the MARB's past recommendations, which are listed on the left side of this table, right? So in short, to make sure that we advance and deliver on equity and, of course, our efficiency as an organization in each initiative area, we will have to focus on 3 things. One is the practices and procedures for special education practices. 2 is high quality and inclusive instruction, because we've had conversations with this group before about when you outplace students, it does not necessarily mean that they're having access to an inclusive educational experience. And third, focusing on organizational structures and our capacity, since we have had conversations also about we just can't, design and try to implement programs to bring kids back if we don't have the capacity in district to do that. As we move to the next slide, the next 2 slides, key findings, and then the following slide titled Key Findings, Practices and Procedures for Special Education. So we found that in both out-of-district placements and paraprofessional services, our data indicate that we are at risk of over-allocating those services through our referral processes, evaluations, and how we allocate, the practice of allocation of services. So these are restrictive services that should be used minimally. As for MTSS, and if you I'm going to just digress for a little bit there at the bottom of below the green where it says MTSS with an asterisk, as a reminder that multi-tiered systems of support, that's what MTSS stands for. It's a framework to provide targeted support to struggling students that are not necessarily yet special education students, right? So the idea is that if we provide these services and this continuum to students that are struggling, and we do it well and we do it with fidelity, then students would possibly not need a special education services. So as for MTSS, we flagged that as an opportunity to better focus and coordinate our staff who do that work, more as prevention and intervention before referrals. The next slide, other key findings with regard to high quality inclusive instruction. When it comes to inclusive instruction, that means students accessing their educational programs with their peers. We have some important findings here related to our special education processes and practices. And I'll kind of summarize. First, we are very much at risk of over allocating services that make it harder to provide students with the least restrictive and inclusive education. We place twice as many students out of district as our peer districts, and many of our schools appear to receive more paraprofessional services than their students required. And a second significant finding is that without having a coordinated strategy around that MTSS and the tier one, then of course students are also at risk of receiving special education services without getting that baseline of support from teacher or staff that should be happening first. Follow me to the next slide where key findings around organizational structure and capacity. And these findings point to very clear ways that we can improve across each of these areas that we listed as high leverage areas. Across the board, we found that we can improve our data systems in districts on how our offices coordinate and use their respective data. And there are areas of improvement on how our experts in the central office oversee service delivery. In many cases, we can be better at helping our schools identify students whether they truly need these restrictive services or if our schools are receiving too many services. So next to implementation recommendations, the next slide, and then one over where the title of the slide is the recommendations, practices and procedures for special education. And what I'll do here is just list the key takeaways that helped us work with the consultants to create these recommendations. First, we have these recommendations for practices and procedures, which can elevate a few themes as well. We can and we should, and we will add more be more data driven when it comes to allocating and monitoring the services. And then we can and we should and we will build more channels of communication and collaboration across our district offices. You know, I think this is something that not only us, but many organizations, continue to try to improve, and that's the cross-departmental collaboration and efficiencies. And the next slide with regard to recommendations for high quality and inclusive instruction, some of the same strategies actually we believe and the consultants believe will help us provide more inclusive educational experience to our students. And I think we should specifically focus on our out-of-district placements, which are, when you think about it, they're as restrictive as the services are going to get. So to become more inclusive for our students with our greatest needs, we received two specific recommendations related to out-of-district placements. One is, and this is more near term, is to use our improved data to identify students who could best be served in the district. And then on a more long-term, process, it would be to build our in-district programming to attract more students back into the district and keep more students from feeling that they must leave the district. This is a conversation and a recommendation that we and several of you at the MARB, along with us, have had before. The next slide is with regard to recommendations around the organizational structure and capacity. And here, the recommendations essentially are with a need to improve how we organize and use the data, and then need to build ways for offices to collaborate and communicate while also using those data. And the data and process for collaboration are foundational. I think, we agree, myself, the MARB and the senior executive person who's now going to oversee student support, we all agree that this data and process for collaboration are foundational, and they'll likely be a major focus of Jen Hoffman, who's on the call, who's the new person overseeing student support, in her first 100 days of work. This will be the area that she will prioritize. And then the last slide with regard to looking ahead. So, these findings and recommendations give us a great starting point towards implementing the plans that can result in improving outcomes for students, making sure that we deliver on our equity, on our efficiencies for our students that have the IEPs, the individualized education plans. But, in all transparency, the recommendations are just the beginning. We will have to execute not only near-term, medium-term, and long-term tactics and strategies to turn, our goals into reality. And I think we've had those conversations here before with the MARB around this is not only technical, procedure, process, protocol work, but it's also changing the mindset and practice, across staff around, the entire district. That is an overview of what I call really phase one of consulting support, and then open to conversations and further discussion as to next steps.
Great, Leslie, as Superintendent, thank you for the presentation. I'm going to start and then have committee members jump in. I know we had some really engaging conversations in the beginning of my time returning to OPM and on special ed, and had pulled together a group to talk about this. I wanted to really get your ideas on building in-district programming. And I know we had some conversations about a regional approach to doing so, and the timing for this is perfect because obviously we're going into some policy and budget options that time frame. So do you think that there is a means by which the districts that are most heavily impacted by the special education out-of-district placements could use a regionalized approach to the state helping to build those programs? As I think about other areas where programming is difficult, sometimes the state has to step in with some infrastructure type costs to support renovating space, things of that nature that are conducive to the types of programs that are being provided. And then of course there's the operational dollars, but I'd appreciate your expertise on what that could potentially look like.
Yeah, so I've given some thought to that. And I think there is an opportunity for a regionalized approach. It's not a hesitation, it's just a wondering that I have. Actually, not even a wondering. It is almost like a non-negotiable as it relates to Hartford. And that is making sure that the programs are developed and delivered in culturally responsive ways, right? I think this is the bigger struggle that I have, and that even our community, when we have engaged our families around this topic, and they tell me all the time, Superintendent, if you had the district and program, our kids would be here. And we also know that the research says that, when you outplace a student, it's really hard, to bring a student back and transition a student back because they don't feel like they were part of the community to begin with, right? They're being removed not only from the school community, but from their local community. And so whatever, you know, the vision and the program, however it's operationalized, I just think it matters the context that we in Hartford are in, and making sure that we program around that. That it's not just, you know, that we identify a facility or a space and then, you know, have students, you know, be transported there, that it just kind of forces all of us to go beyond that and really create a structure and a program and a community that these, you know, our students and all of the participants feel like they truly are integrated in.
And Superintendent, these are day programs entirely?
Not all of them are day programs, and I also, I know Jen Hoffman is on the call, and I mean, there's a variety depending on the needs. Most of them are day program. Am I correct, Jen?
That is correct. There are some residential programs and out of state as well.
Okay. And can you remind me how much of your the Hartford Board of Ed budget goes towards out of district special ed placements?
Clarence, do you have that number readily with you? Because I know we have to divide it by correct programming. I can get that to you in a few minutes.
Sure.
When I can pull it up.
Absolutely.
I know that was yeah.
Okay. Other discussion?
Mark, I think that this reaffirms and raises to the fore some of the concerns that MARB had in concert with the superintendent and the Hartford team. The issue of capacity, of course, is paramount. And along with the Secretary's comments about regionalization, I do think that can be done in concert with capacity. And is there a regional approach that can be considered? And I understand the superintendent's concern about creating an offshore, what I call an offshore regionalized approach, where it's more, it may be more appropriate from a community and family situation to be in district. But when you're dealing with specific needs of a child, and the capacity doesn't exist or may not exist within the local association, a local community, regionalized, and that could be for all the, you know, the East Hartfords, the Manchesters, et cetera, to do an examination, and maybe that's what the Secretary might be able to, at least we can talk about later when we have more time, is to look at the surrounding region, Hartford region, to determine if other systems would benefit from a regionalized approach where they just don't have the capacity and it would be too costly to create such capacity, but the needs of the students are not being met. That's number one. Number two, I find interesting what I think is the core, and that is that there is an over allocation of services. The MTSS is kind of, at least it appears to me, to be kind of not very well systemically entwined in the 29 schools you have in Hartford. So you have that challenge to create the systemic way in which the MTSS works universally within the district, create the data-driven resources necessary to monitor the child and the necessary resources in accordance with the IEP. And then, of course, the real challenge, which is identifying necessary capacities. But it is clear, and I think the data that the Commissioner will provide to MARB regarding Christine's question about the cost of special ed, I think is going to show what we already know. It's extremely high budgetary-wise compared to the rest of the district. So all in all, it's a challenge, but one that needs to, personally, as a member of MARB, needs to be forthrightly dealt with and systemically changed in order to drive these numbers down while maintaining the necessary programmatic needs of the children that are being served. So I think this is, at least I see it, and I applaud the superintendent for doing it. The way I see it on the surface is you've uncovered what we believed to have happened, and that is an inconsistency of how special ed services are being used in Hartford, and there needs to be a very, very concerted effort to get the program under control from a programmatic point of view, and of course from a fiscal point of view, because it's just driving too many resources away from the regular ed classroom, I think. But we want to make sure we're servicing the special education students in accordance with their needs as well. So I want to thank you for the work that's being done and the commitment. And we, as a MARB subgroup, I think we're going to need some more maybe designated quality time to make sure that this is being done. I don't want to say well, but it's being done in an effort that we're satisfied with, and if need be, resources allocated from MARB, human resources or whatever, we can assist in that effort, but it's necessary.
Yeah, so I agree, and I don't think I could have said it any better with regard to, kind of getting it under control. And I will also offer another piece of historical context where, Hartford, and I don't know if I referenced this before, way before I got here, Hartford was an autonomous district, right? During the birth of magnet schools, Hartford's reform strategy was too, as they were building magnets and having a district of choice, the operational strategy was to each school could do their own thing. Each school was autonomous. And so, and that could work, but you need solid structures and procedures of support. Over the years, that autonomy continued, and the universal expectations and processes that are necessary, regardless of a strategy of a district, such as the MTSS, were, watered down, were not, just leveraged. And so now I am having to, kind of level set and say, okay, we're finished closing schools. We're finished closing 20% of our schools. Now we have to get to what's our way of work, and no longer, at least I've made it very clear over the past 3 years as I've been in Hartford, that we are not just sending students away because, and I will be very frank, at one point in Hartford, it was a go-to strategy to outplay students so that the needs of the student or the challenges that students, as it relates to behaviors, could be addressed elsewhere. So, and we know that that's exclusionary in nature, and that does not do right by our children. It's work, it's hard work, and so we are committed to doing the work, and we hope that we can continue the dialogue. One, as it relates to potentially the broader regional conversation, but also the more immediate need that we have in Hartford, which is, where we want to go with the implementation of the recommendations.
And Superintendent, are you in the position to kind of speak to what you see as the most immediate next steps for Hartford?
Yeah, so immediate next steps, I'll tell you one of the steps we already took, and that was taking a hard and deep dive into the paraeducators and the allotment of paraeducators. Even though we started doing this late in the spring, in the middle of COVID, we were able to find efficiencies and reduce 14, possibly 15 paraeducators And so already it was a quick, $1.2 million reduction. And that work is going to continue into this year, but it's getting those structures and processes in place, followed by reorganizing the department to really align with, the accountability, the financial oversight and reporting. On the special ed side, the billing piece of it, I know if you all remember, there was a long conversation about residency verifications. So all of those pieces we're working on to start the year off doing. So that's immediate. And then all the other pieces around the MTSS is a non-negotiable for us. That has to happen because that's not just a special education issue at all. That's actually serving all students. We have to get that foundation right to serve all students, including special education students well.
So, Superintendent, on behalf of the MARB, I would like to invite a proposal from you on how MARB can support some of these immediate steps. Obviously, there's some work that you can do internally. You do have the consultant who's helped you get this far. But if there are some investments that we can help make that are not towards like fixed costs, right, but that can help you to do some of the reorganizations and some of that infrastructure that will prepare you for moving this forward, I certainly would like to see them. I'm sure that my colleagues would as well.
Is that something formally in writing? I know that we have to continue to do the work and could benefit strongly from consulting support around these things. So I know there are processes and protocols there. I'm not sure what next steps would be.
Sure. I'll have the team follow up with you directly, with your staff directly.
I appreciate that.
Secretary, I do have a question. Excuse me, it's Kim. Superintendent, myself and Julian had worked with you from some of the prior meetings, and I feel like I have a little bit of a disconnect. We had actually created an RFP, and I just didn't understand the results of that lengthy RFP and the hiring of this team that you have been working with for 10 to 12 weeks. During that proposal, that's where we were going to get a buy-in. Is this the actual results of that RFP?
That is phase one of the RFP. We didn't send out an RFP. We wanted to do just phase one to really assess the work that is needed to move forward. And so this is the result of that. Phase two, phase three, or however we want to call it, has not been sent out. So we incurred, Hartford Public Schools contracted CSG to help us with phase one, which is getting an assessment of current state and make recommendations for the short-term and long-term work ahead. Which, by the way, when you look through this PowerPoint, there are many overlaps with what the RFP initially had identified as needed work. So I need to just understand where the funding is going to come from for the work, for the consulting work.
Okay, so it sounds like we would just want to regroup where we initially were with all of the works that we had done with developing the RFP, and then determine what your needs are next.
Yes, and we can certainly regroup, given that the project design for the consulting group that we had was based on some of the pieces identified in the RFP. So we can certainly regroup to kind of do a crosswalk on that.
Yeah, I think it's what's the next steps based on what you've already learned from the existing consultant that you've utilized.
Yes, and those are, sorry, go ahead.
I guess I'm wondering, the RFP that was developed, do we need it? And to me, it's what are the next steps? And how are we able to, what do the next steps entail? What kind of resources and support could we provide to help you move it along? I guess in my mind, I'm not sure if you need the second RFP to even move forward.
The second RFP is needed.
Okay.
Additional work is needed, but it's not the entire RFP that was identified initially, given that we kind of took some of that off to start with the initial assessment, which was part of the initial scope, the RFP. So
Okay.
it's partial.
Okay. All right. Well, I ask that we move that expeditiously. If there are items that I need to be aware of from a budget development perspective that are helpful as we think about special education policy and funding across the state, that time frame is approaching. So if the work happens to align with that time frame, that would be great. If not, we'll certainly have another go at it. But the team, certainly, I'm sure there's a way by which we could help with some of the resources, Superintendent.
Can I just clarifying question? Is that in relation to the RFP? Because we know the work that we have to do moving forward, but it would require certainly putting an RFP out to continue the work.
So with respect to the RFP that you're ready to put work out on the street, if you will, sync up with Kim and Julian so that we understand scope. And you probably have to put the RFP out to get a sense of cost. I believe that the board would likely support. I have some administrative and executive authority over some funds, and then the extent to which it's appropriate for municipal restructuring, right? If this is going to lead to your reduction in overall costs that support the sustainability, long-term fiscal sustainability, then, there might be an opportunity there to provide some support. So we just got to get a little bit more on the scope, and Kim and Julian can help with that, and then we'll figure out if there's a funding path for the immediate work that you need to do. And then as you're thinking about any other immediate next steps, please let us know if there's some support. Obviously, if your work leads to a space where there are legislative type changes that the administration might want to consider, happy to see some of that by October or thereabouts. And obviously we'd want that vetted to the MARB. But if we also want to put forth, you want to put a proposal in front of the administration how to build that greater capacity, as we talked about from a regional perspective, I'd like to hear some bold ideas on that as well, given that you're, so knowledgeable, highly respected, and a subject matter expert, and we should begin to engage SD and Commissioner Cardona's office on some of that. This is a nice opportunity, the final 2 years of the governor's current term, and could be an area for him to lead in. So I welcome some of those ideas as well.
So my next step just is that who are my leads to contact?
Kim Kennison.
Oh, great. Thank you.
This is Mark. I look at it in a very simplistic way, maybe because I'm just a simple guy. But anyway,
nothing simple about you.
You've raised issues that require cultural changes, which obviously you can't RFP. Systemic changes to a degree that you can do internally, and as the Secretary said, you may need some consulting work that maybe MARB can help you with, and capacity issues that clearly, once you identify the capacity needs through a consultant or somebody else to identify the specific capacity needs, then you're into areas that I think MARB would help with. So I break it down to I don't want to say 3 buckets, but you have a cultural issue, like you said, which you had 29 different dynasties. Now you're trying to bring it into a very cohesive piece, data-driven, et cetera. That's going to require some consulting work, et cetera, that MARB can help with. You're going to need some MTSS work to make that consistent throughout the system. You may need consultants there that MARB may be able to help you with, and of course, assessing capacity along with the combination with the combination of regionalized approach. So I think we're speaking the same language. So I would hope the superintendent would be able to say, what can we do culturally inside the district? What do we need help from and request from MARB on outside resources, i.e. consultants, et cetera, to help us drive this bus towards the designated end. So it's a big job, and as the Secretary said, we're available, at least the team is available to help in any way we can.
Thank you, Mark. Great. Okay. Any other discussion or questions for Superintendent? All right. So that's great work. I know we've been talking about this for some time, so I'm really pleased that the movement that we're making and tangible next steps. Moving on to an update on the fiscal 2021 Board of Education budget. Superintendent, back over to you or to your team.
Can you hear me?
PR.
Sorry. Oh, Clarence, are you on?
Yeah, I was wondering if you wanted me to speak or you wanted to speak.
You can start, and then I can jump in if there's any specific questions.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. PR.
You're welcome.
Commission, we had our budget adopted and approved by the Board of Ed back in June. Our adopted budget is approximately rounding up $427 million. Our expenses, however, are approximately $439 million, so there's a budget mitigation of approximately $12.2 million that we have to accomplish this year. That mitigation, that gap originally was in the $24 million range. We got it down to 12.2, and we have a plan in place how we're going to mitigate it throughout the course of the year. It will take some active management on our part, but we feel comfortable with the plan and how we're going to about making sure we can close the gap between the revenues of 4.6.9 to the expenditures of 439.2.
I do want to add that, were it not for some of the allowances to carry over at the state and federal level, we would not, of course, have been able to identify some of the mitigations. So as I look ahead, we still have to think about what the implications of COVID are going to be for us, post 2-3 years.
Hopefully special education will help.
Yes.
That would be very helpful because like we were supposed to have a meeting today, our weekly meeting, the finance department and SPED team. We started recently. Special education and choice tuition represents almost $100 million of our budget. So if you take $100 million and we take 10%, 20%, that's $10 to $20 million. So any type of reduction we can have there would have a significant impact on our bottom line.
Great. So, Clarence, did that conclude your presentation?
No. So I was.
Okay. Please continue.
Yeah,
But just to be clear, you have a $12 million gap, is what you're saying right now?
Yeah. We have a $12.2 million gap that we have to mitigate, and if you like, I can go through detail how we plan to mitigate that, because I assume that you'd be interested in knowing how we're going to do that.
Before you do that, sir, can you tell me what your actual projected spend is for 19?
For 19, you mean this upcoming fiscal year, or just to close the fiscal year?
Apologies, guys. You're for 20.
For 20, hold on. We're carrying a surplus. We're trying to close out right now. I can give you. We expect we may have several $1 million in surplus, which we've shared with the city. A lot of that will be driven by medical, our medical coverage. We had a lot of folks due to COVID who didn't go to the doctors because of the lockdown, so we didn't have a lot of medical expenditures. So we expect to see a surplus over what we saw a normal amount because of that. We're trying to work that out because we're doing closeout this moment. So I suspect the surplus will range in the millions of dollars. The Anthem Blue Shield alone, last we checked, was a $6 million surplus over last year. So I suspect that surplus will be anywhere from $6 to $10 million, depending on where things work out. We're actually doing a closeout now, trying to figure out whether it is. That's one of the reasons why the city hasn't been able to finish theirs, because they're waiting to hear what we have to say.
All right, so just looking at page 7 of your adopted budget, operating budget, I see that you had a fiscal 19-20 adjusted budget of $429 million all funds, and the adopted is $427. So what's your current understanding of where you're going to close fiscal 20? 429.3 adopted. Thinking you're going to close around 425. Is that what you're saying?
I'd say 425 to anywhere between 417 and 425, just because, like I said, we had about $6 million surplus in our healthcare coverage, and we have some other things where we didn't spend, like, for instance, buses. Some of the bus savings we transferred to cover COVID expenses, so we're trying to work out those nets between the unexpected costs for COVID and the savings we had due to COVID.
Okay. All right. So over to you to finish your presentation, please. Okay.
So projected for this current fiscal year 2021, we're projecting revenues of $426,934 in revenue. Dr. Torres Rodriguez mentioned some of that is carryover funds that were one-time carryovers because of COVID, so that increased our revenue number. To her earlier point, if we did not have that carryover, our budget mitigation would be much larger, but we were able to get some carryover both federal and the state level. Are you talking about the
ESSER funds clearance, the education, elementary and secondary emergency relief CARES Act funding, or other funds?
Other funds.
Okay, so you didn't include that in here, right?
No, that's not including it in this.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Our expenditures are projected to be $439,204,791. So we have a budget gap of $12.274 million, which, as I said earlier, we were originally around $24 million. We were able to make some adjustments, cut some things, get it down to the 12.2. The way we plan to mitigate the 12.2, we've made an assumption that we will have some projected vacancy lapse of around 5.5 million. You all had requested our vacancy numbers, so I think Julian provided you all. Of that vacancy number, we're going to assume 5.5 of that as a vacancy lapse savings to close the gap somewhat. Then we have another $500,000 on what we call our outside use fund. We charge outside groups for the use of our facilities. We have a surplus in that fund. We're going to draw $500,000 from that fund to help mitigate our gap. We also have another $4.9 million that we're going to transfer from OPEB. We used to have to contribute to OPEB for some of our retirees. In the past, we had a change in our agreement with our retirees. They now fund some of their health care coverage. So that money's just been sitting there a few years unused. So we set up a process with the city where as the retirees' health care claims come in, we can forward the expenses over to OPEB and they'll pay it out of that fund. That way we can avoid the expenses on our balance sheet. So that's another $4.9 million that we've already worked out with the OPEB committee to have access to those funds. Also, we have another approximately $1.3 million in cost avoidance. As you all may know, we are in the process of relocating our central office over to Buckley High School, and I will give you advance notice. I may get cut off in this call because they're literally cutting out the wires of the building today, so if I do cut off, I apologize. I'll call back on my cell phone. Between the lease for this space at 960 Main and the parking garage, that's an additional $1.3 million of cost avoidance, which we will use to mitigate that 12.2 budget deficit. So it's a 5.5, I'm rounding here, 5.5, another 5, 4.9, and 1.3 gets us up to the 12.2. So we feel very comfortable that we'll be able to achieve that mitigation. And the one thing that will require some, as I say, active management is the vacancy lapse target.
Very good. So first of all, congratulations on fixed savings of $1.3 million cost avoidance. We started that work when I was at the city, and I'm glad to see that coming to fruition. I know there's a period of time where we wanted to go slow and we thought that the work couldn't be done in time, but we were able to do that. So kudos to the team, and the Deputy Secretary was passing by when he heard you saying that and gave a major thumbs up. So congrats to the city on that. Couple of things. With respect to the $4.9 million from OPEB, what is your unfunded OPEB liability for the board side of the house? And what was your balance as of June 30th, 2019?
Right now, I think we're actually overfunded. That's why we're using the 4.9. So let me pull up.
Okay.
That's why it's excess. This 4.9 is excess funding. That's why we're able to access it, because we haven't, since the retirees are now paying. This is all being used for our retirees, so for their medical expenses. So once we change our agreement with them, they're covering their medical costs. It's now an overfunding of that account, because we haven't contributed to that this account in I think it was 3 years. So right now it's overfunded, sitting there. We haven't drawn down on it, so that amount is not covering any underfunding. It's actually overfunded.
Okay. Would you be so kind as to send over to Kim and Julian the updated actual valuation for the OPEB that's reflective of the collective bargaining changes, just so that we can see that your updated liability was X and you closed June 30th, 2019, or if you have a projected 2020 at X, and therefore there truly is an overfunding. Okay. Obviously, we typically wouldn't bless or be comfortable with drawing from OPEB, but in this case, if you've satisfied your liability, then you're not violating a financial best practice. So that's helpful.
No, yeah, we've Go ahead.
Go ahead. Nope, I'm good on that. In the interest of time, I'm going to just ask one more question so that the rest of the committee can jump in. It's going to be a two-part question because I'm sneaking two questions into one. So given that you're going to close the fiscal year at between $417 million to $425 million, can you just touch upon the major areas of increase in the budget? And then secondly, superintendent, maybe we'll start with the second first. Superintendent, does your projected budget of $439 million include any of the fiscal impacts of the reopening plan that is being finalized? I know that SDE did survey the districts on the expected cost to reopening, and we are vetting every few days those costs and what the state response will be. But I just want to understand if some of your gap is unanticipated reopening expenses, et cetera.
Those are not part of that.
Okay.
We are now finalizing our models for submittals tomorrow, and then we'll be costing out all of the staff-related implications. And so, no, they are not.
Okay, thank you. All right, and Clarence, very quickly, some of the highlights of your changes. I assume you have collective bargaining agreements that are settled that might have some cost increases. I know you did a good job at the labor table.
Yes, ma'am. The major drivers are clearly collective bargaining agreements. For instance, we're up on just certified salaries alone. We're up $5.7 million. Non-certified around $500,000, and then fringe benefits is another $9 million. So that's a total of $15 million just between.
Okay, we might have lost Clarence. Is everyone else still on?
I'm here.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Why don't we open it up for other questions until he joins for the superintendent?
This is Mark. Just quickly, hopefully the superintendent has the budget in front, but on page 60, there are several, Madam Secretary, several issues, but in this space of time, I don't want to get into them where there's been FTE reductions, but increasing salary costs, which is confusing. But rather than getting into that, if we could just look at page 60, which is the achievement first, I believe it says achievement first on page 60, and which we know has been an issue before, and we're still waiting for legal from the city side, which I have no idea if it's ever going to get here, but that's neither here nor there. I think it's, I'm scrolling here to look for it myself, but on page, 50,
Okay, there you go.
Yeah,
Okay.
50, it says, maybe the superintendent can help me out, tuition. I thought, which is 1.5 for the Achievement First, and of course utilities, which was not there, and now it's 443,000. First of all, on the tuition side, Madam Superintendent, I thought that you had notified, I know under the MOA or MOU, whatever you want to call it, there was some obligation of tuition with the exception of notification by the superintendent that they can't afford it anymore, quote unquote. And I thought you had notified them that you would not be paying them tuition, or is this some other tuition cost that you're paying to Achievement First? I mean, obviously it's not a Hartford school, so I don't understand the tuition.
The tuition for special education services?
Oh, okay. So those are all, that tuition is basically reimbursement of special ed costs then?
Yes, and others. We can give you a breakdown, actually. You're talking about page Achievement First, yes?
Yes, Achievement First, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I was confused because I remember there was some MOU that dealt with some per pupil, quote unquote, tuition, and you notified them you weren't doing that. So when it says tuition,
Yes.
I got confused. But if it is special education costs, then that explains it. But if you could forward some explanation to that, that would be great.
I can, yes. 2 years ago, I said no more extra tuition, right?
Yeah, I remember that conversation. And getting back to page 7, which is the one, the only other question I would have, again, for purposes of time, on the, oh, it's not page 7, it's trying to go, page 6, as a matter of fact. From private sources, it says tuition building about 6.2 million. It went down to 1 million. Why such a wide disparity between this year and next year? If you look on page 6 towards the bottom, it says tuition billing.
I'll have to look into that. I know that we have been scrutinizing our private billing for out-of-district placements, and so we know that there were some students that either were transitioning out and no longer would be requiring services, but I can also give you a breakdown on that one.
Yeah, this is on the income side, so I was just confused a little, but that's fine. If you can just mark that, and when Clarence gets the opportunity, maybe you can forward it along. That'd be great. And again, in the interest of time, I think those are the only two major ones I have.
Other discussion? I have a question on the revenue page on the City of Hartford contribution that's going from 96 to 101. Was that an increase in the city appropriation to you? Or are you reflecting like COVID contingency? Just curious. And Yolita, if you're on the line and you recall, that's helpful as well.
I am on the line here. Let me just look at it quickly. What I have in here.
Jolita, yep, go ahead. Jolita, I was going to say, I think that's where there were funds that came in after the fact for the hurricane, to support with the hurricane victims.
That is correct. This is Clarence. I got back on the call. I apologize. Yep. So to the previous question about the $6 million, those were funds that came in after the hurricane. It came in after the close of the fiscal year, so we had to put it somewhere. So the finance team put it in the grant account. That's why you see the drop off. Because when the funds came in, we'd already apparently closed the fiscal year, so they couldn't put it somewhere. They put it in the grant account for an accounting measure to book the money that came in, but it came in post our close, so they had to find some way to account for the money. That's why there's precipitous drop from the 6 million down to 0.
Sorry, Clarence. Urian, thank you. We're glad to have you back. The tuition billing, you're answering the tuition billing question that Mark posed, the 6.2 to the 1 million. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And sir, you're saying that that was one-time revenue that came in. Can you just clarify why that was 6 million in fiscal 20 and it's projected at $1 million in 21?
The majority of that, about 5 million, was a one-time revenue coming in from the post. I forget which hurricane it was. One of the hurricane storms. The money came in after the close of the fiscal year, so we had to put it somewhere. So they put it in their grant account. You see the change year to year.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Clarence. The other question that we were asking when you hopped back on was with respect to the City of Hartford contribution line, which shows the 95.9 million in fiscal 20, growing to 101.6 in fiscal 21.
Oh yes. Oh, so that is COVID related. As the mayor mentioned earlier, there was 2.9 million that had been surplus that the city was giving back to us. When we saw the surplus in our health benefits account due to COVID, we indicated to the city we'd like to carry that forward to use it because we expect once doctor's offices open back up, there'll be a flood of claims. So that's part of that surplus we talked about in our health insurance account is we modeled it going over to the city for us to access for the claims to come in post the close of the fiscal year. So it's not really they're giving us any additional money. It's part of the surplus we talked about from this past fiscal year.
Okay. The increase, though, happens to be like $5 million and not 3. So can you just follow up and Good.
Yeah, so the 2.9 from last year, we had built into our budget for this year. We hadn't received it as of yet. So when we talked to the city about trying to carry forward the 5.5, the 2.9 sort of buried into the 5.5.
I see. So, okay. Thank you for that clarification, Clarence. So problem. I would note that you're using one-time funds to cover fixed costs. So, and I've said this to you previously to the Board of Ed previously that every year when we talk about these gaps, part of it are recurring gaps. Some portion of it is the same gap that never got permanently fixed because use of one-time revenues helps you for 1 year, and that gap still materializes in the next year. So I see that being 5 million of the 5 million portion of your base in fiscal 21, as well as the $1 million in the Alliance District grant carryover that will support fixed costs. You're going in with at least $6 million of one-time funds covering fixed costs, and I just want that on the record for MARB. And that concludes my question. Thank you.
You're absolutely correct, and we discussed it. We basically what I've viewed is we've got bridge funding until we find a permanent solution to some of these issues.
Yep. And the last thing I'll note for the MARB, this is the second year of a phase-in of the new ECS formula. So the board's problems would be even larger if the Alliance District portion of their educational funding from the grant did not increase. And so they are getting about a $3.5 million increase that's consistent with current law. So the state has provided additional support through that formula. And certainly, as you can see, they need it because the problem would obviously be much larger.
Madam Chair, may I answer an additional question that I thought I heard come up about why there was an increase in utilities at Achievement First?
Yes, sir.
So as some of you may know, we used to have a thing called EDO1 that all school districts have to fill out every year for the state. They changed that to a new EFS system, and the state mandated that we sort of push out utility costs to the individual schools. We used to have that at the district level. So if you look at all our schools, you'll see there's an increase in utilities because it was previously at the district level, but we had to put it at the school level. That's why you see the change.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification. So it's basically a reallocation, and I will never forget the wonderful experience producing a very small part of the EDO1 4-year report. All right. Any other questions on the fiscal 21 Board of Education budget? I respect that we've gone over time here. Okay. Very good. Is there any other related business for today? Okay, seeing none. I just to conclude on comments, I think we made a lot of progress in today's meeting. Really appreciate the city's efforts to put pen to paper on, for the most part, I think credible plan efficiencies on 5-year mitigation gap. I do want to have the team follow up on the extent to which the grand list growth is not achieved. We just want to have on record how much those deficits increase. Appreciate the efforts on the corrective action plan on audit, understanding there's more work to be done and follow up there. We've been talking about the special education work for some period of time, so the consultant's work and the superintendent's leadership is really appreciated, and appreciate the update on the Board of Education budget. I think we touched upon really delving into some larger legislative structural type issues that this board should continue to work on, such as being a voice at the table with the legislature and the administration on adjustments on muni age strategies, as well as really pushing for some reforms or new strategies surrounding special ed. So I look forward to continuing this work with you and appreciate all of your hard work. And if there are any remarks from my co-chair, she's still here?
Yes, I am. No additional comments. But I do agree that this was a very, very productive meeting, and we took up a lot of important issues.
Thank you very much. All right. So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right. In a second.
Mark, second.
Excellent. Very good. We are adjourned. Thank you all. Look forward to seeing you soon, virtually. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you.